it's pretty good news when a government comes out and says, hey, we're going to ban single-use plastic. And we're going to do this, this year, and it's going to be a phased approach, but we're going to ban single-use plastic, especially when there's been a war on single-use plastics for quite some time, looking at how much plastic gets into waterways and the oceans and how it damages the oceans and kills species. So it's great when a government does this. But then you start to think about what are the alternatives to banning single-use plastics. It's the use of other materials that may or may not cause environmental harm. I think it's important that companies and governments start to look at what are the alternatives and what are the risks of making things worse in another sector. So we're going to talk about that on today's episode of How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about taking action, but also sort of speaking up for the ocean. It's a bit of everything's melded in and what's going on in the ocean. There was an article on CTV News, which is a local station, or I guess a national station here in Canada, talking about how paper can't be a solution to plastic waste. Canadian environmentalists are warning about the rise of single-use paper products. Now, when I first read this, I was like, oh, dear God, here we go. And not because I'm worried about the problem, I'm not worried about the problem. It is a concerning problem, but because I can see how people are going to relate to it, or respond to it, I should say. This is my worry. This is my big worry. Because let's be honest, people want convenience. And to have something in a to-go container or have something in a bag of some sort, a paper bag to take your groceries, it's convenience. We have stores that are on the corners here in Canada and probably the US that offer products that you can get at the grocery store, but they're on the corner of your street or somewhere close because it's convenient. It's called a convenience store. And so, we are built on how to make life more efficient, how to make life so we can kind of take things and go and move and go quicker and move faster and get more done. So by the end of the day, we can be like, hey, I'm productive. Let's be honest. If you go and look up productivity on YouTube, you can see millions of videos on how to be more productive, how to get more done in a day. How to increase your productivity, all these different types of keywords that if you search on Google or YouTube, you will find a ton of stuff. Like, it's a ridiculous amount of stuff. And it's all about sort of moving through life faster. And to do that, you need products that can help. I mean, they have bottled water. Bottled water in countries where bottled water is not necessary. Right here in Canada, we have the largest resource of fresh water. We take care of our water, arguably, but we have drinking water available through our taps. We pay taxes on it, but essentially, it's free. I can go to my tap water right now, and I could drink some water. I can fill it up in a glass and drink some water. But people will go through bottled water. Not only will they go through bottled water at convenience stores to make it more convenient in case you're not around a water fountain, but they will go buy it at like big box stores, come back, bring it home, and drink bottled water out of that because they don't necessarily like the taste of the water that's in their taps. Now, for a number of different reasons, but let's be honest, when it comes down to it, Canada, US, most of Canada and US have drinkable water. And they spend a lot of money, governments do, to ensure that it is safe. Now, I know there have been some problems in the US with drinkable water. So when it's safe to drink, we should be drinking it out of the taps, not drinking bottled water. But people will buy bottled water to make it convenient. People will buy vitamin water, even though there aren't really that many vitamins in the water. It's just sugar. We'll drink sugared water. Now, I'm putting out my opinions on some of this, but when I look at a convenience store and I look at all the bottles, all the plastic bottles out there, I'm like, why are people buying this? Because it's easy. It's colorful. It's nice. It's tasty. It's easy. And we look at all these products that we have, that like all the things that are available to us that we don't necessarily need, but we want, and we go after it and we get this. All the services that are available that provide a lot of waste or give things with a lot of wasteful things because it's convenient. If I go into a takeout restaurant, and I take things out, it's got to come in a package, right? It's got to come in a package. And so that is something that, we see all the time. Taking away single-use plastic is a good thing. Not having it available to everybody and providing alternatives is a good thing. But at what cost? This article that I was reading on CTV News looks at the alternatives, which is paper, right? And paper products are taking over the alternatives. And some organizations are worried because they're saying, look, even though we absolutely need to shift away from using plastics as much as we do, but trading in plastic pollution for deforestation and forest degradation is not the answer. We really need to make sure we do not create another environmental disaster. And that's a really important thing. We need to make sure we do not create another environmental disaster. Everything we do potentially has consequences against this planet. Right? And so we need to look at how, we need to run the risk of what's it going to look like. If we take away single-use plastics, what's the risk of damaging the environment further by alternative products? Right? What's going to replace them? And do we really need a replacement? Can we not go for something that's more minimalistic? When you look at the zero waste movement and sort of that lifestyle, where we've talked about it on this podcast, the zero waste movement is not necessarily about convenience or fast-paced lifestyle. It's about going to a minimalistic lifestyle. It's looking at ways that we can reduce unnecessary containers, unnecessary waste. So imagine living a lifestyle where you produce little to no waste. From a food perspective, from a container perspective, from a plastic perspective, from a recycling perspective. Imagine going through life without having to worry about putting out the recycling, putting out the garbage, because you are producing zero to no waste, right? Little to no waste. That would be pretty cool. It's not easy to do, especially in today's world, if you want to live in sort of the regular world. I've had a family on that did it. They, converted their backyard into gardens, which means they have to spend more time in tending to those gardens, more time in making their own food and making their own sauces and making their own products, right? Being a little bit more innovative and spending more time, doing things on their own, which takes up time from being more productive in other ways, as we traditionally see. But we've gotten into such a place where we are taking away single-use plastic, but we are not questioning our daily use of the amount of waste that we produce on a daily basis. Imagine looking and sort of auditing, just like I say to people, when you look at how much plastic you use, look around your house and do an audit of, food containers and, takeaway containers, and looking at just the products that you have, how much plastic is in those. And you start looking at it, you're like, man, we use a lot of plastic. And then saying, okay, systematically in my house, I'm going to go through and I'm going to try and move things over to something better, maybe more reusable instead of single use. We look at single-use plastic, but now we have a lot of single-use paper containers, single-use paper products. You look at a lot of restaurants are moving towards that alternative. I went to Subway the other day and I got one of those rice bowls. And the rice bowls come in a container. It's like a paper-based container, which could be recycled, I think. I don't know for sure. I used to trust in the recycling process, but I'm not sure I do anymore. But that tends to get used more and more. It's a single use. We should, instead of going to single use, type of product, we should be going to multiple use. We shouldn't be looking at single use. We should be going to multiple use products. When you start going to multiple use products, you start to use less of the single use. So it doesn't matter the material you use. You're actually taking your container and using it over and over and over and over again. And I know that's pretty simple definition. And that's what the definition of multi-use is. But just imagine a time where we don't need single-use products anymore. We just create products. that are multiple use that we can bring around and we can put into container. When you go into a zero waste store, you're bringing like your containers that you have from home, right? Whether they be glass or plastic, you're using it multiple times. And then you're filling up your products based on that. Now, not everything can be in that, but it's nice to have, right? It's nice to reduce the amount of single-use stuff that you use on a daily basis. It's a shift in the way we think. It's a shift in the way we live. It'll maybe be less convenient at times, but it'll be helpful. And sometimes it might be unavoidable at this point, but the more we ask, the more we change, the better it is. And I fully agree with that. We have to change. We are being forced to change. We are being forced to change the way we live. There's no doubt about that's coming. We are in the process of doing that. And governments are taking their time to do it, but we are getting it done. Hopefully, it'll be in the same time frame that we can save this planet. But we are definitely going to have to change the way we live. And so to start thinking about these types of choices and not getting frustrated by the fact that, hey, we've got to go from plastic to paper, but we got to get away from paper pretty quickly because that takes up a lot of trees. We've talked about that before, not just on this podcast, but in conservation. It's like, oh yeah, we're not printing as much paper because we're trying to save the trees. You probably see that on the bottom of email signatures, right? Please don't print this and think about trees and don't print this paper. Digital copies, archives of digital copies are being done instead of paper copies. We're seeing that more and more. So things are changing, but now we're going back to paper products. And so we're worried about using trees and deforestation and so forth. Because with this world, globalization takes over. So your paper products may not come from your own country, but may come from a country where the regulations are a lot different and you can cut down a tree to make paper. You never know, right? We've seen the destruction of the Amazon forest, not necessarily for paper, but we've seen it for, cattle farming. And that's had some huge consequences on a lot of things, including the sargassum problem that we have in the Caribbean and in the Sargasso Sea because of nitrogen coming out, more nitrogen from fertilizers from these farms that are being cleared by trees by deforestation. Now imagine if you're using deforestation as a way to create paper products, chop down a tree, make paper out of it. Now we're getting less forest, probably more farms. And it could be greenwashed by like, hey, yes, we're making this farmland, but we're using the trees as for paper products because we need more paper products because we are still doing single use and it's easier that way. And I've gotten into the habit of refusing plastic bags. I've gotten into the habit of just refusing containers in general now. Not everywhere. I've started to really think about sort of single use in anything. Right, which is actually taking me away from buying more things like food products and things like that come in single-use containers. Because I can have my own multiple-use containers at home and bring them to work or bring them out where I can eat my stuff. And I probably end up eating better because of it, right? Because I'm having home-cooked meals. But on the other side, it gets frustrating for people to be like, oh, now we can't use single-use plastic. And now that we have an alternative and we've changed that system, we've heard of plastic straws and we're sick of hearing about plastic straws. But now I got to change. Like I can't use paper products, but there's nothing else available. What's available? Right? Now I got to really change my lifestyle. I got to really think about how I use products. Not single use. Now I got to do multiple use. Well, it's always changing. And I don't like changing in the first place. We've gotten so far by changing single-use plastics, now we got to change single-use paper products. And what's next? Well, I propose this multiple use and refusal of single use. And so as we evolve as a species and the way we have to evolve our behaviors to go along with that to ensure that we are not providing too much waste. We're not using wasteful items or products. And it's very difficult now because there are a lot of wasteful products. A lot of wasteful products. And it seems like we're going the opposite in certain areas. Containers are shifting to paper products, which is probably better than plastic products at this point. But then you look at, what people are peddling online, and there's a lot of use of plastics. There's a lot of use of, fashion, cheap fashion and things like that. So we're always changing our behaviors or trying to change our behaviors to help the environment and not looking at just greed and making money and having all these things, because these things are usually not necessarily worth it. And we need to sort of reduce and change the way we live, change our lifestyle to be able to better suit the future and the planet, and we can still be happy. So I'm kind of all over the place, but one, this article just highlights how we need to move away from single use, and not just single use paper products and plastic products, but single use and more towards reusable and multiple use. And then the other hand is like, I see the frustration that people are going to have with this. And it worries me. It concerns me because people are going to get exhausted of this. We should be going more multiple use. We should be going better sourced and better products. But when push comes to shove, it really comes down to, is this convenient and is this cheap? So how are we going to get away from that? I would love to hear your thoughts. Can you DM me at How to Protect the Ocean? How do we move forward? How do we get people to change their behaviors and change their lifestyle without getting them angry and exhausted of all these change for the environment? I'd love to hear from you. Hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I really appreciate it. If you know someone who would like this or who you've had the same conversation with and would like this podcast, please feel free to share. That's how we grow our podcast and our sort of our audience and reach more people to have these meaningful discussions. And of course, if you want to be on the podcast to discuss your conservation journey, just go into the show notes and you'll see my Calendly link. Feel free to book a time so that you can be on to tell your conservation story. I would love to hear it, and I'm sure the people in the audience would love to hear it as well. By the way, you do not have to be, I've had some questions where like, hey, I'm not a marine biologist or I'm not a conservationist, so I don't work in the field. You do not have to be a marine biologist or a conservationist. You just have to be an audience member, and you have to have a conservation story, whether you're at the beginning of that story or that journey, or you're in the middle, or maybe you're at the end. I don't know, but I would love to hear that story. There's no judgment. It's here to talk about conversations, talk about the struggles, the challenges, and the successes you've had and how you've changed your life. It doesn't even have to be because of this podcast. It just has to be, I want to hear your story. I want to hear how people are going through life, maybe to get ideas myself and to provide and share ideas for you, this audience. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. Looking forward to hearing from you, and happy conservation.